Hello, my name is Dan. I make pizza for a living. I have been making it at home for a long time, and these past 2 months, it's all I've been doing is making it at home. So I'm gonna show you some ingredients that you should probably have. Some are hard to find. Like this is probably right now the hardest to find because everybody wants yeast. But if you find a place, buy a whole bunch. It might be backwards, but this is just like active dry yeast. There's 3 packages. If you wanted to use your own starter, that would be a different recipe, and I'd be happy at the end to recommend a live active starter recipe for you. But this is just the easiest, most basic way to make dough and pies in your oven. Some other things you'll need: a measuring cup, not so much to do dry measure in it, although you could if you wanted to like correlate those numbers. But a scale is great because we're going to do this just in straight grams. So I'll give you what the grammage is. And then if you want to translate that into some other form for whatever measuring device you have, you can do that. I'm sure there's a website that can explain that to you. Okay, so to start, first thing we're going to do is when you buy this yeast, it's not always going to be alive. It's supposed to be alive, and if it's sealed, it should be alive. But there's a good way to test it, because if you were to just put it in dry mixture and not test it, and it turned out to be dead, and you come back 3 days later, then all of this has been for naught, and your dough hasn't risen at all, and you have like matzah. So nobody wants that except for Passover. So we're going to take 1/4 or 2 1/4 of lukewarm water, not too hot, because if it's too hot, then you'll kill the yeast. And what we're going to do is bloom it while we mix our dry ingredients. Pardon me while I fill this with water. Okay, great. So we have 2 1/4 cup of lukewarm water to bloom our yeast in. So we're going to put that, we're going to end up using a couple different containers to do this. But first, just some pot that can hold it. And then what we'll do is we're going to measure out how much yeast we want to bloom for this particular recipe. This recipe is going to yield you like 6 or 7 doughs that are probably going to be like 8 to 10 inches around, depending on how long you proof them. They'll get larger. But I mean, also they could just make a bunch of large doughs. It just depends on, when we get to that stage, I'll show you how to cut them and roll them, and then you can decide how big you want them to be. But on average, if you make them a normal size for like a conventional oven, then you're going to get like 6 to 8 out of it. So what we want is 3.5 grams of this dry yeast. So I'm going to measure that out in my measuring cup, sitting on top of my scale. Perfect. And now what we're going to do, here's what the dry yeast looks like. How do I do the
3.5 grams?
Yeah, 3.5.
That's what 3.5 looks like.
That's what 3.5, well, that's what the yeast looks like. With 3.5, if you want to eyeball it, yeah, 3.5 looks like that. And then you're just going to pour it into your water. And then what you want to do, which you wouldn't do with a normal dough recipe, but because we're doing it at home and we really want to make sure that, where is it? We want to make sure that our yeast is alive. Take a little bit of sugar, and that's going to feed the yeast, and it's going to be, like, it wants sugar to eat off of. So I'm just going to pour like, that's probably like, I don't know, 2 teaspoons, maybe like 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. And then that mixture is going to look like this. So you see all the yeast on the top moving around. And then what you're going to do is take your hand and just kind of swoosh it all together and let it all hang out. And there'll be little clumps in it. When you see that, like take in between your fingers. Like, you know, when you were younger and you use like chocolate milk mix and there would be like a little pocket of it that's still dry in the milk?
Yeah.
That same thing will happen with the yeast. Burst it open, and then you want all that to be floating around regular. So that's done. Now let's work on our dry ingredients, because it'll probably take like 5 minutes to bloom. And when the blooming happens, I'll show you. It'll look like a little galaxy is starting to form on different sides of the bowl. And you'll see if after 10 minutes at the most, if you don't have any reaction, then your yeast is dead. You have to start a new package or open a new one of these and do the whole process again that we just did to make sure that it's alive. Because again, if your yeast isn't alive, then this is all going to be for naught. Okay, next thing.
What
Big
usually
bowl.
causes yeast to die? Like, is there stuff that like people forget that makes it die?
No, just time. Or if you open it and don't refrigerate it, it'll be more prone to dying. But sometimes you just buy shitty yeast from a store and it's no good. And you just always want to check. So what I usually do is like that package, I know that I used from that same batch the other day, so it should be good. But once I open the first one and I see that it's alive, then I don't test again. I can just do it all. I don't have to wait. I still mix wet and dry separately, then combine. But you don't have to like play the waiting game to see if you're gonna continue on with your recipe, which, I mean, I'm confident it's okay, so I'm gonna keep going. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is, and also I didn't mention before, so this isn't like a Neapolitan recipe or a butter crust or a Detroit or anything like that. This is kind of like a classic New York pie recipe, as classic as you can make it, you know, in your own home oven. So that's what we're doing right now. Next up is we're gonna measure out our flour. It's going to be kind of an obscure number, but gram-wise, we're going to have it come out to 796 grams of flour. And we use all-purpose. If you want to use wheat flour or, I mean, I don't know if you want like a wheat dough, but if you wanted to use like nicer sourdough or bread flour, then that'll give you a more complex tasting dough. But this is totally fine. I just bought like Bodega gold medal flour. And also what's handy is because of all this part is a bunch of numbers, so I have a pen and a part of the New York Post that I'm writing everything down on, which you can use whatever paper you like. Okay, 796. Turn our scale back on, and we're going to measure out the first part. Okay, so that comes out to 343 exactly. 343. And then if you have something like this, it's nice to sift the flour so you have less chunks. But again, we're kind of doing this like MacGyver style. I doubt that a lot of people who watch this are going to have pizza peels. So when we get to that process too, there'll be a different way to take care of it. But if you have the means and you have one of these, or even a real sifter, sift your flour to avoid a bunch of big chunks that are going to end up dry in your dough when you ball it up. So we're just going to take that out. Hey, yeah. All right, that's the first one. We're going to go back to our scale. So far we have 343. Let's fill it up again. Wow, both nailing it exactly both times. This is 337, no decimals even. Incredible. So 337. So 6, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that'll come out to 680. In total, we have 680 so far. We're going to sift that again. Okay, and then we have one more. So, all right, and now we just need 116. All right. And the final sifting. Let's check on our yeast. Oh, it looks good. It looks like it's about to start going, I think. Okay. All right, we're gonna let that keep going, and then the way that I do this is actually pretty annoying because I don't have the proper salt shaker, so I have to grind it. But we're gonna want 15 grams of salt also. So I'll start that process. Oh my God. All right. So we're gonna add that to our dry mixture. Okay, and perfect. Our yeast is just starting to bloom. So if you want to see what that looks like, it is very cool. Here. Oh, let's see if there's a way to get the screen out of there. Oh, once I said something, it stopped doing what it was doing, but I can describe it. The way it's going to look is like there's something alive in there, like little tiny fireworks. They're going to like explode and expand across the entire bowl, and you'll see it'll start just looking like milky water, and then if you catch it expanding, it's very cool to watch. But if you come back and it just looks like there's a new film that's developed on top, that means your yeast is alive and it is active and you can use it. So we have all that. Now that that's happened, we're going to add about a teaspoon of extra virgin olive oil to our liquid. And then here comes the tricky part. If you are so fortunate that you have a mixer of any kind, use that. And only use the hook feature. Don't use like some sort of
like the heater?
Huh?
Like the one that has like the 4 prongs?
Yeah, no, don't use that. You use a hook because that's what you want it to fuck with the dough as little as possible. Pardon my French. But I don't have any of that, so I've been doing it all by hand. So this is kind of an annoying part. And I'll show you how to do that. So what we're gonna do, I have to think, this is also something that I do constantly because I definitely have been spaced out for one reason or another, started mixing and realized, oh, I forgot this ingredient and this ingredient. Let's take a second. Salt, oil, yeast. Okay, we have it all. So I'm going to start incorporating this. You're really going to want to get around the bowl. And it's going to be very sticky, so don't freak out because it's like you're going to have a serious amount of sticky flour on your hands when you start. But the more that you work it, the more it's going to give and the more it's going to start to create the shape that you want. So this goes on for a while. So here, yeah, your hand's going to be like this. That's just kind of how it goes. That's why this is not the most fun part. But A good trick if you got to get flour off your hands is take some dry flour, and don't put too much, because what you don't want to do is you want your dough to have a lot of moisture in it, because the more hydrated it is, the better it's going to proof and taste later. But if you don't necessarily cover in flour, but you get like just a little coating, a little coating of flour on your hands, then you can take that, and that'll allow this hand to kind of stay clean while it takes off the sticky parts of the other hand. So we'll do that. And some of them are just too sticky. We're gonna go back. And so you'll see it's not gonna be like a cohesive dough at this point. It's gonna be really shaggy. And it's gonna pieces are gonna be falling off. But don't worry, that'll all come together with persistence. All right, so you can see at this point it's definitely not fully together, but it's more of a ball shape than we started with. We've got some little remnants in the bottom there, little crumbs, but I wouldn't worry about those. What you're gonna want to do now is knead this dough out on a table. Let me actually see if I can get more of this off me before that process. Again, this is like the most tedious part of it. And then once we do this, you're home free and it's all fun stuff from there. All right, 1 second. So you're going to want to generously flour your table. Otherwise everything's going to stick. And then you're going to spend some time trying to get this dough ball a little more smooth. If you were to do, there are different recipes that call for different things. Like if you're doing a different style pie, at this point, after the initial mixing, you would let it rest for a while and then come back to it in like 30 minutes and it would have doubled. Then you pat it down and do it again. I've been experimenting with different ways to do this, but for this method, I would just continue to knead. And it actually takes longer than you think it's going to. You think a lot of people under-knead it, but for the kind of consistency we're going for, we're going to want this to be way smoother than it is. And you'll see at the end what it looks like. And then I have one that's finished that I can bring over and show you how to divide. And another good test, too, to see if you're getting there, if you go like this, and it tears, oh, sorry, I'm out of screen. If you go like this and it tears, like see that starting to tear?
Yeah.
We don't want that. We're gonna want it to be real stretchy. So yeah, it's already, you can see it's already starting to get away from that tackiness we had just by folding it on itself. It won't feel like it will. It'll feel like it keeps tearing apart at the beginning, but if you just keep with it, it'll start to form what you want. It's a kind of a patience thing. So it's getting there. Also another test that you want is when you poke it, I don't know if you can see, it's going to start to come back. It's going to like spring back again after you poke it.
Like memory foam.
Yes, like memory foam. Like an Italian memory. All right, yeah, that looks really good now. So what we're going to do, let's see, how do I explain this? So, one second. We're going to take our bowl again, put a little olive oil in the bottom of it. And then what we're going to do is, so see my hands are like under this dough on either side, and I kind of got my thumbs on top. What we're going to do is kind of fold it and use these hands to kind of tuck. If you can see that move, we're going to make a ball out of it. All right, the worst of it is over. You have an enormous dough ball. Fantastic. And now you're going to take that, rub it around in the olive oil. I like to add a little more on top because, ooh, sometimes it'll go up to the roof and stick on the plastic wrap we're going to put on it. So, also, this is another part of it. When people make pizza dough, let me clean up my hands. When people make pizza dough, they often think of the idea for that night's dinner, and they're like, fuck yeah, pizza night, let's do it tonight. But in reality, you need at least 24 hours. Also, to get the flour off, or to get the stickies off, just put flour on your hands and rub them together, everything will come off. But yeah, it's a time, not so much like, it's not that it takes a lot of time labor-wise, like this is the most labor-intensive part of the entire process, but it definitely takes time to proof. It has to rise like a lot. Otherwise, if you try to shape it, it hasn't bonded completely yet. It'll start tearing in your hands, or it'll just come up flat and not have as much, like the more you go, I have a dough in my fridge that we're gonna take a look at in a little bit that I've had proofing for like over 72 hours just because I hadn't made anything with it. So we're gonna see, we're gonna compare that. This is fresh, we're not gonna do this one. And then I have one that's just been over 24 hours, and that's the one I'll show you how to make dough balls with. But yeah, it's you have to plan, if you're gonna have a pizza night, you have to plan it days ahead of time. All right, the next thing you wanna do is really tightly, ooh. I haven't cut myself in so long, it feels like I'm back in the kitchen. Motherfucker. You're gonna really tightly wrap the top of this guy. And I have bodega cling wrap, which is the worst on earth. Oh my God, it's so irritating. Hold on. I'm gonna do it this way. Hey, Kate, can you do me a favor?
What is it?
Just hand me some scissors or cut this or something?
Katie.
No, it's okay. Actually, I got it. Never mind. No, it's all good. Good. So yeah, you want this to be totally, totally airtight. And because we're doing a New York style, you can also, I mean, you can experiment. It's still gonna come out good. That's what I've been doing most of the time is I was trained to do it a certain way, and I've kind of been just experimenting for fun to see how different things turn out. Proofing for longer, or like leaving stuff outside when it should be refrigerated. But usually what you do with this dough is refrigerate it immediately. But again, if you felt like it, you could leave it out for a while and see what happens. It's not going to be the end of the world. All right, hold on. Like I said, this is bodega dough, so it's awful. So it has to be taped. But it's not even decorated. Well, anyway, it doesn't look that way this way, but you want it to be totally airtight. If you have really good cling wrap, it'll just wrap on itself. This is like, has no static to it. So if you got terrible clear wrap brand, then you're gonna want to tape it with duct tape or masking tape or something like that, because you really want it to be totally airtight. So we'll put that aside, and we'll grab the dough that I had going. I only had one bowl, so this is not, I would use a plastic bowl. I wouldn't use an aluminum bowl like this, but you see it'll double and get big and get kind of airy in there. And then we're just gonna dump, well, actually more flour on the deck first. Ooh. And you can tell already what you're gonna put in before it goes in the fridge is gonna be much denser. And then over time, this is like full of bubbles and really, really airy. You'll be able to feel the difference immediately. It's gonna be very wet too, so you're really gonna wanna flour it. Woohoo! Amazing. Okay. This one actually turned out great. All right, so now we got this big thing, and what we're gonna do, you could use a scale to measure it if you really want even ones. That's like in a restaurant, if I was measuring out dough balls, they would all have to be the same weight. So that's important, but it doesn't matter now. I would say if you really want to have all of your guests or whoever you're making pizza for, your roommates, your family, you really want them all to be uniform, then the only way to really get that perfectly is to do it with a scale, but you don't need to do that. So what you're gonna do is cut, let's get a little down there. You're gonna wanna cut out a little section here. I'm gonna make them bigger this time. This is one's gonna be particularly small. So you're gonna take it, right? We're gonna turn it upside down. And all of these little points underneath, we're gonna tuck in. And then we're gonna go like this. The same thing we did with the big ball, but on a smaller scale. Okay, and you'll see over time, it'll become like second nature. I mean, I don't know how much pizza you're planning on making, but if you keep doing it, it'll become very easy. Which at first you'll see when you try it, it's a little difficult to get the muscle memory for it. And then this part, this is the rolling part. You're gonna put it down like this with all that folded under, and then you're gonna put your hand on top, kind of tuck your thumb under here, pull back and let it go up your thumb, and then back around again. So that's gonna, you know, I can even actually, if you had too much flour too, like if you had too much flour on your deck, then it's all gonna be slidey. So I put a little water there to give it a little bit of stick so it stays in place. And then we will have a nice, smooth, lovely looking dough ball. This is about a day and a half, 2 days later from what we just did before.